A lawyer is sitting in the brand new car that he just bought, enjoying that smell of new and quite expensive leather. Eager to show it off to his new lawyer, to his lawyer friends, he goes to pull the handle and push open the door to get out, when all of a sudden an 18-wheeler drives by and takes the door completely off its hinges. The lawyer screams in dismay because he knows that no matter how much he pays for the best auto body shop to fix his car, it will just never be the same. A police officer happens to drive by, and the lawyer runs up to him and yells, "That trucker just ruined my brand new BMW." The police officer looked at him and said, "You're a lawyer, aren't you?" And the lawyer, getting irritated, said, "Well, yes, but what does that have to do with my car?" And the police officer laughed and he said, "You lawyers are so materialistic, I bet you didn't even know that your left arm is also missing." The lawyer looked down at his missing arm, and apparently also that had become detached along with his car door. And once he realized what that meant, he screamed, "My Rolex!" Priorities. Have you ever been so distracted with what seems important at the time that you miss the bigger picture that's right in front of you? Our lawyer friend in this joke is so devastated that his expensive possessions have been destroyed that he fails to realize he's in a very precarious medical situation that may negate the need for any expensive possessions ever again. And while I can't say that my priorities have ever maybe been quite that mixed up, I also can't say I'm very much unlike this lawyer. It's easy to get our priorities out of order. In fact, just this past week, I was reminded of a time when I may have mixed up my own priorities. Last Sunday did happen to be my birthday, and for my birthday, I did receive a little bit of money as a gift. Now, I do like to collect baseball cards, and I have ever since I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. And I'm sure that you've seen pictures or maybe perhaps heard news stories about some famous old baseball cards. These cards are usually from a series called the T206 line from 1909, and cards of, say, Honus Wagner or Ty Cobb can go for thousands, even millions of dollars. But recently I started poking around and I found out that a lot of cards from that same year can be had for less than $50. So I found a card that I liked in my small budget, and I bought it. A few days ago, my card arrived in the mail, and of course, I was quite proud of it. I now own a baseball card that's over 100 years old, so naturally, I had to post it on Facebook. One of my best friends from high school, whose birthday happens to be just a few days after mine, jokingly commented that he bought a new cordless vacuum for his birthday, and at least one of us has their priorities right, and it wasn't him. Now, I know that even though he was joking, I had to stop and think about that a little bit. I was already well on my way to writing a sermon for this week about personalities and priorities, and here I was buying a baseball card instead of something actually useful for an adult. I think our gospel reading this morning is an excellent example of mixed up priorities. From the book of Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 to 42, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened up her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." I love the image that I get of Jesus when I read this story. I see him, in my mind's eye, slightly surprised by Martha's outburst, maybe a little bit exasperated, but also a little bit amused at her distress. I see him saying, "Martha, Martha," with a smile on his face and a slight shake of his head, maybe even a little chuckle. You see, Mary and Martha are both faithful followers of Jesus. They're friends. And I think that Jesus knows exactly who Martha is, why she is upset, how she is feeling. But he also knows that there's a time and a place. Right now, Mary is focusing on what matters most at this moment in time, and he won't take that away from her. I was a little surprised when I was researching this passage this past week, and I think a lot of people maybe missed the point of this story. I saw some commentary on how Jesus harshly rebuked Martha. I even saw one quote that said Jesus got this one wrong. He messed this up. He yelled at the wrong person, and instead of yelling at the hard-working person in the kitchen, he should have yelled at the lazy one in the living room. I don't think for a moment this is the message that we're supposed to glean from this story of Mary and Martha. Instead, I see this story as a lesson in priorities and personalities. When do we mix up our priorities? How do our personalities get in the way? Dr. Roger Berkman is a psychologist in Houston. In his computer personality profile that he outlines in his book, True Colors, that you see on the screen, he asserts that all of humanity can be boiled down to 4 distinct personalities. You've heard of types A and B personalities. Well, now we can break that down further to types C and D. Let's look at what Dr. Berkman came up with. First is the action-oriented doer. When this person gets going, you best just stay out of the way. They are people of action, as the title implies, and they will always be working hard, even if they work ahead without much of a plan. The second one, then, is the detailed planner. A detailed planner comes up with, you guessed it, a detailed plan. And as long as nobody messes up that plan, they are just fine to be left alone, work according to their plan, which is usually planned out to the smallest detail. Next, though, is the enthusiastic salesperson. Let's wing it might be something that the enthusiastic salesperson would say. They're a people person. They usually work very well with others. They have the gift of persuasive talk and are more inclined to just see how it goes and we'll figure it out when it comes to getting something done. The artistic philosopher is the last, and this might be what we would call the starry-eyed dreamer. The artistic philosopher is creative, and they always look for beauty in nature and in art. You know, it sounds impossible to break down all of the people in the world into just 4 categories. We're all so different, we're all so unique. But Dr. Berkman might also be onto something here. He does go on to make this a little more simple to understand and even a little easier to identify each type of person. He says, imagine that you have 9 cats in a house and that your task is to get the cats out of the house. How would you do it? How would the action-oriented doer handle this? Well, obviously, the action-oriented doer would just take charge and say scat, and the cats had better get out if they know what's good for them. The detailed planner, on the other hand, would number the cats 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in calligraphy with neat tags attached to the right side of each collar. Then the detailed planner would make 9 neat holes in the wall and number them 1 through 9. And cat 1 has to go out hole 1, cat 2 has to go out hole 2, cat 3 hole 3, and if cat 4 happens to run out hole 7, then the whole plan is thrown out of whack. The enthusiastic salesperson would say, no problem, piece of cake, I can handle this. And he would just open up the door and the window, get some warm milk and some cat food, and go outside and say, here, kitty, kitty, and convince them that they're better off outside anyway. Meanwhile, the artistic philosopher would say, what in the world am I doing worrying about cats? Mary and Martha represent 2 very distinct categories in the Berkman personality chart. I see Mary as the artistic philosopher. She is completely content to be learning from Jesus at this moment in time. She finds value and importance in what he is teaching. Martha is our detailed planner. She has every minute of this visit planned out. She has a meal to prepare, a house to clean, mouths to feed, and Mary has thrown a wrench in her plan. She has left her sister all alone to put all of this together, a contingency that Martha obviously did not plan for, and now everything in Martha's eyes is totally derailed. Personally, I believe that if Martha doesn't get herself worked up to the point where she is stewing so much that she eventually boils over and erupts, there's never a problem here. But what happens is that she stops doing her work for the purpose of serving the Lord, and she starts becoming blinded by distractions. Let's flip things around here in this story a little bit. Let's imagine that Mary is daydreaming about whatever a philosophical artist would daydream about. She's not helping her sister, but she's also not listening to Jesus' teachings. She's daydreaming about something else. And let's assume Martha airs the same grievances. Then what would have been Jesus' response? I have to believe it would have been a little bit different. A second scenario. What if Martha joyously carries out her work, knowing that what she is doing is for the comfort and the care of her Lord? Is there even a problem at that point? Does she get upset? I don't think so. But neither of these things happened. Instead, Martha works away in the house, all the while stewing and simmering in frustration. She had a plan. It's all falling apart. Nobody's helping her. Jesus is here, and no one is helping her. And remember that Jesus is here. He's teaching in her home, no less. Who wouldn't love for that to happen? And yet Martha is just letting this all waste away by becoming angry because Mary recognizes that something special is happening here. You see, Martha's personality makes her susceptible to this type of distraction, just like Mary's personality makes her susceptible to other distractions. If we were to look deeply at each of those four personality types, we would find that each one carries its own share of strengths and weaknesses. Each one has its own pros and its cons. We can know that Jesus values all of these personalities equally by the fact that he doesn't surround himself with just one type of disciple. He doesn't only have artistic philosophers like Mary. They wouldn't get very much done if they were daydreaming all day. He also doesn't surround himself with only doers. Maybe they would miss some of the more intricate, beautiful, simple things around them. He doesn't surround himself with only planners. He needs people that can pivot easily. And he doesn't befriend only salespeople because not everything is handled just by smooth talking. Instead, he needs doers and planners and salespeople and, yes, philosophers too. Each one of these personalities has an important role to play. And so I'm confident that Jesus is not telling Martha to be more like her sister. He's not telling her to stop working hard. He knows that Martha needs to work hard and also that she needs to have a plan. She needs to have that in place to accomplish her work. It's what makes Martha, Martha. He's not telling her that she can't be herself. He's not even telling her that her hard work was a problem even while he was teaching. What he is telling her is that her priorities are not in order. She isn't choosing what is best. She's choosing what's best for herself, and she's not choosing what's best for herself. She's not choosing what's best for her sister. She's only concerned about her plan for that day. Jesus is hardly saying here that Mary's personality is better than Martha's. He simply says that she has chosen what is better. We can't choose our personalities. We can choose how we respond to any given situation. We can choose how we prioritize what happens in those situations. We can choose to step away from how we would normally act if the situation calls for it. Our first reading this morning, we're reminded of this very same idea. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Martha could have done well to take the words of the author of Ecclesiastes to heart here. There is a time to work, and there's a time to listen. There's a time to plan, and there's a time to be spontaneous. There's a time to ask Jesus to put your sister in her place, and a time to understand that maybe she's onto something. And when we're talking about a time for everything, aren't we really talking about priorities? There is a time to prioritize planning over uprooting, weeping over laughing, being silent over speaking. Maybe our personalities urge us to uproot over plant, or to laugh over weep, or to speak over being silent. We are who we are, and that's a good thing. God made us that way. When we all work together and put our personalities to good use, the result can be beautiful. But that doesn't mean that there isn't also a time for planting, weeping, and being silent. Priorities and personalities. One thing pulling us in our normal direction, and one thing that should tell us when to go in that direction or ignore that urge. Martha's story isn't one that tells us to not be ourselves. It's one that tells us when to be ourselves, and when to step outside of ourselves, when to be who we are, and when to be a little bit less like us, when to be worried and upset about many things, and when to choose what is better. Amen.